So welcome everybody. We're trying to build a little bit of a momentum here and get more people involved, right? And like this is the first time after we did our version one launch that we're doing this. So welcome everybody. We mostly have the team here, and Kay Elliott is an audience member, and obviously if you want to speak and like when we get to the section of like whether it's Q&A or chime in, feel free to raise your hand. We're totally collaborative. So this is not just a webinar of sorts. And today what we're roughly covering, right, and there's a lot of flexibility in that, is this here. What is Runme, end-to-end walkthrough. I'm probably going to be fairly exhaustive there, but try to get to it pretty quickly. And then we're going to take a look at Max's favorite feature, the upcoming terminal notebook, which a little bit of it we released as part of version one, but we've also been polishing that quite a bit for other use cases, other scenarios. So we'll go over that. And then we'll just kind of like take a look at like sort of what's sort of in the immediate, the next features that are coming up on the roadmap and we're going to be shipping. And, and then we'll just kind of like open the floor, right? And that's how we're going to go about it. So maybe I'll just start by, showing everybody what Runme is, right? So the idea of Runme is essentially to make it so that like your good old readme.md or any other markdown file for that matter is not just rendered from a raw markdown into something that is nicer to look at. Like for example, the built-in markdown previewer that VS Code comes with. The idea really is to take it to the next level and say, why not make an interactive notebook out of it? This is probably not the best example, I'm just realizing, so I'm just going to open another one. Here we go. But same idea where, let me just open it side by side. You basically have a raw markdown file, and what Runme will do is like when you open it, and I'm using VS Code here because we have a VS Code extension that will do that for you. It will render it as a notebook-like UI where anything that's a code block will basically turn into something that's executable, right? So when I click the play button here, boom, you get the output. And as you can see, I'm already kind of test driving the notebook terminal here. So you don't just get the terminal down here, or wherever it is for you. You also get the terminal inside of the notebook, right? So the way you could imagine this, or like the way this actually works, is like there's a single process that's underlying here that runs this command, but both the integrated VS Code terminal and the notebook native attached terminal show the same output, right? And you can also input. So we'll go over this a little bit more later. But the idea really is you don't really have to do anything to your markdown, and there are ways to make the Runme experience even better by modifying your markdown, but like right out the box, you don't really have to do anything. You straight away get like the ability to just click the play button and just run your code blocks, right? So the way you can imagine that is like really anywhere you go on, let me maybe go on a repo on Git that has a README, there's oftentimes command blocks in it, right? And it's sort of like sequentially, oftentimes they build on top of one another, and Runme will just let you run them instead of like copying it from here and then, command tab or alt tab over and paste it into your terminal. So that's like the very, very basic idea. And essentially what it will do is like it just cuts out these unnecessary steps, that it takes to like, do this one here, copy, and like, I guess I don't want to copy the annotation and then paste, right? Whether you copy it from here or from a preview or from a website doesn't really matter, right? Of course, we also, build a way so you don't even have to worry about like cloning into a repo. If you're really just looking at, GitHub or a website, there's this convenient feature of a Runme badge, right? And like, this is configurable, right? It can say run this README, run this markdown, really whatever you want it to say. But when you click on it, it'll ask you, can I open VS Code? If you have VS Code installed, you can say yes. And then what it'll do is it'll just clone into a repo. And it takes a little bit. This is something that we're still working on optimizing. I think we have a spinner in here, but boom, here we go. So you get the repo right in your VS Code, right? Very nice for VS Code users, first class integration. So, please go and use it. Outside of that, what you really can do with Markdown, with Runme then is like annotate your Markdown to even make the execution better. And the way we do that is there's a convenient, oops, it sometimes does that. It's the demo gods not being graceful with me today. But the way you can essentially decide how the execution experience will be for anybody who runs or consumes your README through Runme, there's a configure button on any cell. And the reason why you need that is that not every cell is executed equally, right? And what I mean by that is this one doesn't really have it. So I'm going to go back over here, close a bunch of stuff. What oftentimes is the case with READMEs is that it documents, like how your development process works, right? And your development setup. So you have things like npm install, right? Which is straightforward. You hit the npm install button. I already installed the dependencies prior, so this doesn't really take any time. But what will happen next is likely for like a web app or I guess for any modern app that has some sort of compiler or bundler, you have a background process running, right? And the sort of out of the box experience that we have with this runnable README is that any cell is being looked at as like an interactive process that it will not block your notebook experience, but it will essentially assume that it finishes, right? So it has a finite sort of like execution. It starts and it ends, right? That's not always true when you like look at something like a bundler. A bundler runs in the background, right? And this is sort of like where this concept of a background task comes into play, and you can turn this on in the annotations here. And once you turn it on and you save it, it will essentially be written back to the Markdown file, right? And let me look at it in the source file here in the raw Markdown. Now I'm having a hard time finding it. It's right here. Right? And this UI here essentially makes it so you don't have to worry about like how to type those out. And there are other ones that essentially like let you do, decide if you want to close the terminal if the command is successful, which is very helpful. And this is something we're probably going to phase out now that we have the notebook terminal, right? In the past, what we would do is we would pop it open. If it succeeds, we would just close it, right? Because you wouldn't want to, oftentimes if it succeeds, you're probably not interested in the output as much, right? So we also kind of honing how this will work. And if you want to like know all the details about it, I encourage you to go on runme.dev, check out the documentation. We have pretty extensive information in here, how this works, what it will do for you, and what scenarios you want to like, tick what box and all the functionality, right? So I'm not going to go through every individual little configuration option here. So Runme dev. If you're brand new to Runme, it comes with a walkthrough. I already closed it, so it won't show it to me, but I can re-trigger it. So if you first install it, it will prompt you, do you want to go through the walkthrough? And there's a pretty concise way of like laying that all out to you too, and you can like kind of scroll through it if you are on your own time. Anyways, jumping to the next sort of feature. This is the VS Code experience. And we don't just want to limit Runme in and of itself and also the user experience to VS Code, right? So what we've launched just about 2 weeks ago, I think today, in Runme version 1.0 is the idea of what we call a kernel architecture. And this idea of a kernel architecture is leaned onto existing notebook technology, like most notably like Jupyter. I actually don't really know any other ones that are out there except for us Runme now. And I'm sure there's like, I know that there are backends for, like any sort of language, any platform to be able to write notebooks this way. But I think they all roughly fall under this Jupyter umbrella, right? But the idea behind it is, this is a UI, it is a client, and then there's a server behind it, right? And the kernel architecture essentially creates the separation between the client, which is the VS Code extension, and the server that runs in the background and maintains a session, right? And the way this works is yeah, there's a server running in the background, and we also have a terminal user experience. So for anybody who loves the terminal or doesn't want to exclusively do anything in a notebook, or has use cases where it's more suitable to have a graphical user interface like this notebook up here, you can choose to use a notebook. Otherwise, for power users and all that, the CLI is a really nice user experience. And what we have done as part of one of the notebook architecture in our version 1 release is we're making it so that this server shares the session between both UIs, the notebook UI and the terminal UI. So I just added something to my environment by essentially setting environment variables. And like when I click on here now, I can see, foo bar, foo 1, bar 2 being the values of those environment variables. And if I change them again, foo, I don't know, 10 and bar 20, right? If I click here, I expect those values to come out here, right? So to put this in context with the CLI, there's a little button on every cell that actually lets you execute the CLI. And as you can see, I just did that. I get the same values, right? And I can now even go run my CLI command, get the same command blocks in a more concise terminal appropriate UI, and then I guess if I find the right one, which should be not that, this one here. No, it's not that one. Echo service token. Where is it? Here we go. Yes. We get foo and bar again. So it's a silly demo, but in a lot of ways, what I'm trying to showcase here is that, if you mutate the session inside of your notebook, the CLI will know about it and vice versa, right? And that gives essentially us this gives this sort of interoperability, and it enables use cases where, pick your own, preference if you use one or the other or both, or use case appropriate. The other thing that you can do is stick it inside of continuous integration, right? But before I go there, I'll stop real quick because I've been talking a lot and see if there are any questions or if anybody has any comments, anything of that sort. Please. Nothing to add? Cool. All right. So next up is essentially, now that we've seen, how the UI works, what this, one Runme does in principle, right? Like the idea is really to take documentation, make it executable, sort of fuse this notion of workflows that exist inside of your repo with, and that are being documented in one way, shape, or form. And hopefully that is the case. It's not always the case, but really make it so that you don't just write words. You use words what they're good for, which is describing the what, but then ideally use these code blocks to express how to get and how to achieve those steps that you're taking, right? And it can be a sequence of commands. It could be running a script, right? But it kind of lets you create a narrative, take step 1, step 2, step 3, to get to your desired outcome, right? And maybe let's run through a quick example just so, we exemplify this a little bit better. I've already launched the server here. This is a Next.js app. It's part of our example repo, examples per cell. It's a Next.js app. If I click this button here, it should probably pop open. Here we go. Because it's running in the background, right? If I click open terminal, you can kind of see there's the trace back of my bundler, my Next.js. And what I will do now is I'll just deploy this Next.js app to Vercel using Runme, right? And it's super easy. First thing I do is I log in, and this is sort of already showcasing this cool new terminal notebook terminal feature. I use GitHub to log in. Just do a quick auth run. Boom, I'm logged in. Then I can check what team is currently active. That's the one I want, right? So I can skip the switching step, which let's skip it. But I do want to use an existing project, right? So what I'll do is I'll run this step, which should give me the list of available projects, right? And it happens so that I deployed this before and I called it Runme example one. But I could also deploy it into a net new project if I wanted to create one from here, from the README UI. So I copied this one into my clipboard and I can run this. I could technically also rewrite this README here to like just source that information into, or like export it into an environment variable, right? But like, this gives you sort of a natural flow of like, you get that information that you want to use in the next step, right? And here's sort of like a key feature that I forgot to mention earlier of Runme. If you have any variable substitution as part of your command blocks, you can essentially use environment variables in a way that is probably familiar. If you put export in front of it, we'll pre-parse this block, and if and essentially like make a user complete that value. And there's a difference here. If you don't use quotes, let me show you what happens. It'll use it as a prompt, so you can see that this text here is grayed out. And now I'm just copying mine into it. But what I could also do is, if there's a default value, let's assume I want everybody to use this, but in exceptions, maybe not, right? Maybe this is the staging system, but if you want to deploy to production, not encouraging you to use this all to like manage, like promoting from staging to production or like through the life cycle. But when you put quotes around it, it will make it a default value. See how now it's actually seeded and I don't actually have to like change it. I can just confirm it. So there's just a subtle difference in there. The details for that are also in the documentation. And then, I'll basically just tell the Vercel CLI that I am interested in linking the existing project that lives inside of Vercel with my local directory. And I basically just say, I don't even have to say yes, I just confirm the default steps, right? Boom, I'm done here. So now this directory on here and like my app is connected to my local directory, right? And when I click play, and if you use the Vercel CLI, it's a little unintuitive in my mind. Is like if you don't have any command line, any subcommand on it, it will just by default deploy. So, we'll just click on here. And currently, and this is sort of like work in progress, we do have the notebook terminal now produce its output. We do also have an integration that makes a graphical integration of that, and I'll show that in a moment. I should have probably turned that on. We're currently working on like essentially making it so that you can run both in parallel. But this is still work in progress. So let me turn off. This is currently opt-in. And let me run it again. So here we go. I do think everything should be set up. So it should just be a matter of clicking this one again. Yeah. So now you can see that graphical integration, and the work that we're currently doing before we haven't decided exactly if this is going to be part of the upcoming release or not, but we do want the notebook terminal and we do want this graphical integration with Vercel, at the same time, right? So so now it's done with deploying. If I click on here, boom, I get my app, right? So it's the same as what's being served on my local host. I guess here we go. It's the exact same thing. So, the way Vercel works is like, if you're happy with the preview URL, you might just decide, oh, cool, this works. I like it. Let's push it into production, right? And you just click that button and that will do it for you. So we'll wait the 30 seconds that it takes. Or more like 45, let's see. Which is also nice. You can just see, gauge execution time here in the notebook. Let's see. We need that elevator music from earlier. Here we go, 22 seconds. And now it's promoted. So if I technically remove this here, which is just the project name, boom, it's the same thing. Right? So, I mean, I could edit something on that page to like drive the point home, but like, I think folks understand the process. So we're moving on from that. And essentially this is, a showcase of like what you could do with Runme, but you could run migrations, you could run any sort of developer workflow, grab a token over here, process it and get another token. and ideally retain the token while I'm working with like downstream commands in here. But when I close my notebook, I want that token to be essentially erased from my memory, right? So it has some nice properties around like being able to like productively work in the moment, without like soiling, like your hard drive or either .env or something along those lines, right? Because the state is retained as long as the server runs, right? And if I click the close button here, my notebook will close, the server will close, and we'll forget about the environment state. Any questions about that? Max, is that like is that like I have a question? Okay. Cool. So I'll just keep going then. All right. Next one up is CI/CD. So we've what we've done with like version 1, and this was part of our like launch announcement, is essentially take the sort of architecture that we I guess refactored, evolved is probably a better word, that we evolved Runme into, and deploy or like integrated it into a showcase that takes the CLI, puts it inside of like CI, and uses a README file or like a markdown file that documents like a workflow to not just test that CLI, but test the documentation that explains to you how to use that CLI, right? And like when I say that CLI, I most specifically mean Linkerd. And Linkerd is a service mesh in the Kubernetes world and in the DevOps world. This is probably well known. What it does is like it lets you instrument your Kubernetes cluster, and you get like latency stats. It has like a lot of features. I'm not going to go into detail because I'm not going to do its justice. But like if you're interested, Linkerd.io is the website. What we've essentially done is we went on Linkerd.io, and what you're currently seeing here, this getting started guide, is what we are testing in CI and CD. So we're basically integration testing, not just the not kubectl, not Linkerd. We're integration testing this documentation here, whether or not it will work, right? And of course, Linkerd and kubectl and all those constituent parts, right, that make up this tutorial here, this getting started guide, are being exercised and sort of like tested in an integrated fashion. Right? But like what you're really doing is you're integration testing your documentation, right? And I know it's a little mind bending, but I wanted to make sure we're making this point. So the way this essentially works is this is an open source repo, and it's open for anybody to really take a look and see. It's a fork of the Linkerd website because our friends at Buoyant, who are the maintainers of Linkerd and who provide this documentation and maintain it, they also develop their website in the open. So this is open source, or at least public source, I should say. I don't actually know if there's a license in here. It is. Let's see. It's probably Apache. Yes. So it is open source. And what we've done is we cloned it in a fork, and we added some GitHub actions into it, right? Well, actually one GitHub action, a workflow. And we call it DX because you're testing your developer experience, right? You're getting started guide. So now I'm going to flip over here and show you how this looks like under the hood, right? So essentially what we are testing is this file it's called _indexmd. I actually just noticed, which is funny, that like since they've actually moved on to like version 13, so we should probably like bump this to version 13 as well and see if it still works. But they're very good at versioning, so we're currently one version behind because we're testing specifically this file here. And the way we're doing this in this repo here that I just showed you, stateful Linkerd website, there's a subdirectory called test runme. And there's a README file in here that like, in true Runme fashion will let you, actually click through and run this tutorial here, or this example outside of CI, right? There's also a guide, of how to run it in CI, which, our friend Bencho, who's on this call here, on this meeting, has put together for everybody. So this also like goes into what else do you need, which is a Kubernetes cluster. In our case, we deployed that into GCP, right? So I'm not going to go into all the details, but the way this is basically put together is there's this getting started bats file, and bats is a bash automated testing system, I believe. It is like a little tool. If you search for bats core, you'll find it. It's pretty commonly used to test any sort of like command line flow. If there's a reason to like test, automate your tests for it. We found it to be a fitting, solution for what we were trying to do, which is basically just execute runme commands, right? So you can imagine basically just doing this runme run. I guess if I do runme list, this is against a different README, but you get the point. Like, it shows you a list of commands on the left, and I could do a runme run. Let's maybe try Docker run and see what happens. Oh yeah, it actually pulls it down because I got my Docker daemon running, right? Anyways, just showcasing that. But the idea really is to define test cases, a test suite around what's inside of this getting started guide, right? And when you look closely here, you'll recognize that this is exactly the same thing, right? Setups, step 0, setup, same thing here, right? Because we're looking at the markdown representation that is the underlying file of what was rendered into HTML here. So we have like a reasonable, plausible, guarantee that like we're running the same thing, right? And we have the command blocks basically be playable. I can click the link here, add the play button, and it will just execute, right? And what I've just done here with the CLI is execute that outside of the notebook in the terminal, right? And the way you can think about the CI example working is the same exact way. We just wrap those individual steps, step 0 in this case, into a block here, a test case that will exercise the respective commands, and then do some assertions on that. So you're checking post conditions, right? And technically, you could do anything in here, right? If there's any sort of like preconditions that have to be met, you could just write them out here in this test case, right? In our case, we don't want to do that because we want any sort of conditions that need to be met be part of the documentation, right? But just for completeness. And and then essentially what we've done is instead of like running this locally, which is fairly easy, it's basically running this, running the file. We just stuck that inside of a CI job that executes anytime you push to it, right? And this is exactly what this here does. We also currently working on breaking this out, so the setup steps and all those are a little nicer, and you don't have to do them manually into like a not a VS Code, sorry, a GitHub action that we're publishing. Christian is working on that, and he can maybe like talk about this in a moment, what it will do for you. But essentially, if I scroll down here, you'll see that it just executes those tests, right? And they're all okay. The interesting part that I probably should mention is that it will do that against a live Kubernetes cluster, right? So right now, I'm connected to my dev cluster that also runs inside of GCP, which I set up prior. And the instructions are also in here, how to connect to it. And I could technically, I'll just click the play button while we keep talking. Just run this from my notebook here. There's a little bit of work that I have to do to like turn the notebook terminal on here. I haven't done that yet, but like this can actually also look nicer with like colors and check marks and all of that. But long story short is essentially it runs these test cases. There is a teardown suite or like a teardown hook. And as much as there's a setup hook, which we're currently not using because it's all part of the README, but the teardown suite will just make sure to like move the cluster into a clean state, right? Because we do have one cluster that we're currently sharing for all CI runs in here, right? And we're using GitHub Action has a way of making it so that you can pin a shared resource for one job, and when there's successive jobs that are overlapping in time, it will make sure that it queues them appropriately, so we don't have to worry about that, right? Like GitHub Actions Runner does that for us. But yeah, that's kind of how it works. And what's pretty cool is you can imagine that, anytime you change your binary or you change your documentation, and you push to this repo, which, is essentially the source of truth for, essentially what the documentation that you're serving on your website, it'll run through an integration test, right? And it doesn't just run these individual, or like any commands, it runs the exact same commands that, a user will probably copy and paste, right? And the next thing that we need to do is convince our friends at Buoyant to put a Runme badge up here, which, we'll get to. Yeah, so this is basically the CI/CD part of it. Any questions? Christian, you want to talk a little bit about the action that you're working on? So it's not just me talking the whole time?
Sure, I can do that. Is there a way to... Oh, I cannot share my screen. Do we need to give...
I can probably just pull it up. How about that? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know how to delegate that. I think it's what Runme action, right?
Minus action. Yeah.
If you stop sharing, Sebastian, other people can share, I think. That's how it works.
Okay, let's try. Christian, does that work for you?
You see, share your screen down at the bottom middle.
I can go live. Share screen. Do I go live here, right?
Or you want the browser? That looks for your browser.
Yeah, that's what I want.
And you have to.
Yeah, I don't have I need to set up Discord to access my share. So can you share?
I'll share it if you turn off yours. We'll do that next time. Screen, entire screen, go live. So
yeah, essentially, the basic idea of the GitHub Runme of the Runme GitHub action is if you have any CLI tool that you have, you would want to wrap it into a GitHub action, because that just allows people that use your CLI tool in CI to just not have to worry about installing it. And so we set up this action for you to just say, okay, I want to use Runme, the Runme action, and that gives you access to the Runme CLI. And you can, say which code cells in your Markdown you want to execute. So in this example, and we're working on that, on proving that. In this example, we have a couple of code cells that have a specific name, and in my CI, instead of running these commands directly, I can just connect them to the code cells that I have in my documentation. And as I mentioned before, some of my things that I like about Runme is that I can just connect my docs to my CI processes so that the docs never get outdated and work as expected. And so people who onboard on those docs will have the same experience as the CI runner, basically. And so, you can use that action to use Runme GitHub action in your GitHub workflow. You can not only use the run command, you can also use other Runme CLI commands that are available. But the basic use case would be you define as one ID or a set of IDs that you want to run, and they're basically executed in CI without you having to worry about installing Runme. That's the basic idea.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And unlike what we've done with the Linkerd example, we're probably going to refactor that. So the release of this is pending, but shouldn't be all too long until we make it available. There's just a whole lot of boilerplate in here. If you look at the individual steps that need to happen here, I do think we install Runme from Go. I think we're literally building it, and what the action will do is essentially just cut out a lot of boilerplate stuff, right? Just to make sure that you can focus on what's relevant, which is like probably the section down here, right? Which is mainly running your integration tests for your documentation, right? So it'll just kind of like simplify the setup. And Christian has also built in a way how you can even skip ahead and not use a harness, like kind of like we have here, or like harness may not the right word, a test framework. But it's sort of like in a lot of ways pluggable, right? Like whatever you want to use. So that's kind of like on the horizon.
It's not only be useful for the testing aspect, right? It's just you can, instead of your build commands or your compile commands that you or you kicking off an npm script, you can just have in your README file, you can have a documentation that describes how to set up the project, and you can just reference to that. So it does not only help you for testing certain things, but also to just generalize the setup of a project and make sure that whatever is in your doc, works in CI as well.
Right. And, you could probably do a matrix build on it. I mean, we probably haven't explored all of the depth of it, but run it against Linux, run it against the Mac, Mini, or whatever they host GitHub jobs on, and all that. So we also be interested to hear what people want to do with it, right? Christian has gone and started experimenting, which is fantastic, and we encourage everybody to do more of that. And let us know, right, if there's anything that doesn't work, or Runme is making difficult, right, ergonomically speaking, or just there's a feature gap, right? We definitely want to hear about it. Awesome. So that's the action. And before we do just open floor, real quick, I kind of already showed some of it as part of just demoing. Runme is the notebook terminal, right? And what I'm going to do real quick is I do have the pre-release installed. So for anybody who wants to be on the bleeding edge and would try to be mindful of not entirely, deploying things into pre-release that are, unstable or broken, right? We try to, in good faith, deploy pre-release versions that you can reasonably use. It's more sort of to break stuff in. So if you really want to use all the new stuff, make sure you switch to, I guess it says switch to release version because I'm already on the pre-release. But if you're on the release version, it will say pre-release, right? And you can see up here that I'm currently on the pre-release. So, that's totally open for you to use. Just know that some of the features there might be experimental, right? But it shouldn't crash on you. And we always, if it happens, if something crashes or something is broken, please let us know on Discord, right? Please reach out to us, GitHub issues. We really want to hear about it. So yeah, what I now need to do is, because we're still in the process of getting this out the door, which should happen hopefully fairly soon. Let's say it's a matter of maybe at the max a week, and Max can then, after I demo it to you, tell me if I'm completely wrong and off. But it should be coming soon. So I'm turning on essentially those two things that are currently opt-in. We still marked all of the notebook terminal features as experimental because we released it and we wanted to give it some break-in time. But we've already started polishing off the rough edges and all that. So this is actually maturing as we speak, and hopefully we'll deploy it soon. So you can turn it on here, and then you do have to restart your VS Code window to pick up on those settings. But essentially what we then have is, and this is sort of our canonical examples page that lives in the Runme extension, which is open source. You get this experience where now anytime a terminal shows up, in the past, you may have gotten into a situation where the terminal popped open, while you were looking at the notebook. And then, if it's a interactive process and not a background task, it would pop open, and then when it's done, it will close because, it succeeded, right? Depending on what your configuration of the cell looks like, but the default is close on success, right? So you got this sort of scenario where you clicked on the play buttons and the terminal flashes open and, opens up and closes, opens up and closes. And if it's a command that completes really fast, it kind of was a little jarring because it was almost kind of jittery, right? And flickering. But now we just, instead of doing that, we introduced this notion of the notebook terminal, which is really cool because it literally just makes the terminal available inside of the notebook. And as you can see, it also does really helpful, has this really helpful feature. We had also renders and ANSI, is it called ANSI? ANSI sequences. So all the coloring, all the, carriage returns, all these fancy terminal UIs, it will actually handle that, right? It won't just print out gibberish, which we've seen in the past, because we didn't handle those sequences. We were literally treating them as plain text. This notebook terminal will do that for you. And what's even cooler is, when you have an interactive, commands or a set of commands that requires you to provide input, right? So here I can literally just type in the notebook, right? What do I think of Node.js? It's cool, but there's Dino, right? I don't know what that means, but I thought I'd be cheeky. How are you today? Really good. So, instead of like in the past, when we've done this, we would pop open the integrated terminal and you can actually see that we can still do that, right? I'm actually going to show that in a moment. But you can look at your terminal here and you can consume what, comes out of it, right? And you can even hit the copy button down here. And it will copy it into your clipboard, right? If you want to use it someplace else. But why would you? Because you can do it all in the notebook, right? You could technically, if I run it again, you could open up your terminal down here and you can also type here, right? Test 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Isn't that cool, huh? I mean, I think it's cool. And we'll essentially this one is currently turned off, so you have to opt in. But once we release it, we'll also turn that on by default. I think this is probably mainly, what this is all about, right? And the idea really is to, go away from doing this or like the notebook or the Runme experience, just popping open the terminal and closing it, because we do want to be able to get to the terminal output, right? But now it's a lot more contextual. Again, if you have like a background task of sorts, let's see, I think the Vercel example is a good one. You basically can run it, right? And the watcher will run in the background, but you will still be able to see the output of it, right? So it's basically kind of passive. So when I click on this, boom, I get this. And I guess there's something in here that's not happy about. I guess this is a warning, so there's probably some deprecation or something going on. And you can still check that, right? Or if you really like the integrated terminal, you can do that too, right? It's still going to be available down here. And yeah, we're currently streamlining the buttons on here just to make them more compact and define the relationship between integrated and notebook terminal. But for what it's worth, this already works really well, and I personally really love it. Max, is there anything that I'm forgetting?
We just pushed the customization, so you can change the font size, family, and you can resize it as well.
Cool.
That's one thing.
Yeah, Max and Bencho actually built this feature, so great work, guys. Yeah, I guess just FYI, that's a good point. It will also auto resize, so as you can see.
You can also change the vertical size as well by dragging the bottom, I think. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that. See? I'm glad we have this community policy for me.
Yeah.
Oh, that is really cool. I didn't know that. Well, good work. So, I think this is like sort of a big step forward. And I think we always wanted to like create this experience where like truly you can do all of your terminal interactions. If that would make sense, I'm not saying, you don't need the terminal, but like you can conceivably do them in here, right? You can run this. I guess I need to turn the interactive on. So this is like some of the stuff that we're still working on. But you can